She was ignored for years within her own marriage, silently humiliated by the man who had vowed to protect her. But when a new man showed up, her husband became enraged. If you enjoy stories of love and romance, watch until the end, and you won't regret it. Subscribe to this channel and leave a comment telling us where you're listening to this beautiful story from. Let's continue. For almost 10 years, Violet Caldwell lived like a luxurious ghost within the St. Helens Ranch, a property that stretched for thousands of acres in the heart of Texas. Its imposing main house built upon a hill, surrounded by French gardens, ornamental mirrors, and silent corridors that echoed only her own footsteps. Married to Caleb Drummond, heir to one of the most powerful families in American agribusiness, she had learned to live under the weight of forced elegance, emotional absence, and an oppression that disguised itself as protection. Caleb was the kind of man who charmed crowds at cattle auctions, at industry conventions, at charity dinners in Dallas with a magnetic coldness that people mistook for charm. But at home, he destroyed in silence, like a frost that kills the crops without a sound. He never yelled at Violet, never raised a hand, never physically locked her in. But he ignored her with such consistency and precision that her soul withered like a flower without water. In the first years of their marriage, when she still lived in the penthouse apartment in Highland Park, before they moved permanently to the ranch, she confused his silence with masculine depth, the kind of introversion that Texan mothers taught their daughters to respect in their husbands. A good man is a quiet man, her own mother used to say. Later, when the months turned into years and the city apartment became just a stopover between Caleb's trips, she thought it was a business strategy, his mind always occupied with numbers, contracts, the expansion of the family business into Oklahoma and Louisiana. In the end, when they were permanently established at the ranch and she would spend entire weeks without hearing her husband's voice, unless he was on the phone talking about soy, corn, or Nelore cattle, Violet understood the bitterest truth. Caleb never loved her. He simply possessed her, as he possessed the Arabian horses, the works of art, the French wines stored in the climate-controlled cellar. She was just another trophy in the collection of a man who measured his own worth by what he could acquire and control. The marriage had been arranged years earlier, when the Caldwell family was facing complete ruin. Her father, Anthony Caldwell, a small textile entrepreneur in Waco, had gotten involved with the wrong people, invested in dubious businesses, and when the house of cards collapsed, the debts were so large they could drag down not only the company, but the honor of the entire family. The threats came by phone first, then in person, men in dark suits showing up at their front door, speaking quietly with her father on the porch. It was then that Caleb appeared as the savior, young, rich, powerful, with that surname that opened doors across the country. He offered to pay off all the debts, give Anthony a respectable job in one of his companies, and on top of that, ensure the Caldwell family would regain its social status. The price was simple: Violet. There was no signed contract, no document that could compromise anyone's reputation, but the expectations were as clear as spring water. In exchange for financial protection and social prestige, Violet was to become the perfect wife, beautiful, silent, present when necessary, invisible when convenient. A woman who knew how to entertain business partners, who looked good in photographs, who never questioned, never created problems, never had a will of her own. And she tried. God knows she tried. Even when she was forbidden from continuing her work as an art teacher, the profession she had, chosen in college and which gave her purpose. "A wife of mine doesn't need to work," Caleb said on their honeymoon, in a tone that allowed no argument. Even when she was advised not to expose herself too much, not to give interviews, not to have public political opinions. Caleb Drummond's wife must be elegant and discreet, Mrs. Marcia, his mother-in-law, would say, as if reading from an instruction manual. Violet tried to adapt even when she lost the baby. She was 4 months along, it was their first child, and she had already chosen the room in the east wing of the house, already imagined their son running through the fields, learning to ride the ponies. But one morning she woke up with terrible cramps, bleeding, and by the time she reached the hospital in Dallas, there was nothing the doctors could do. The miscarriage was catalogued as one of those things that happen, and she was forced to smile at a Cattlemen's Association charity event that same week because life must go on and we can't give people reason to talk. The main house of the St. Helens Ranch, with its 12 bedrooms, 3 living rooms, library, and art studio Caleb had built for her to paint as a hobby, an infinity pool overlooking the hills, and all the opulence that design magazines called rustic chic became her emotional prison. The walls covered with portraits of unknown women, portraits the family had collected for generations, always beautiful, pale women with sad eyes, many of whom had mysteriously disappeared from the family's official history, seemed to watch her every move. Her only constant companion was Anna Francis, the housekeeper who had been taking care of the house for over 20 years, a strong woman, her dark skin weathered by time and work, her hands calloused but her gestures delicate, who knew all the secrets of that property. Anna was the one who prepared her meals, who took care of her clothes, who listened to her sorrows in silence as they arranged flowers or supervised the polishing of the silver. But even Anna, as affectionate as she was, seemed to hold too many secrets, as if she knew things Violet shouldn't know, and so she maintained a respectful but impenetrable distance. The days dragged on all the same, waking up alone in the king-size bed of the master bedroom because Caleb always slept in his office when he was home, having coffee on the east porch watching the sun rise behind the hills, walking through the gardens, painting for a few hours in the studio, having lunch alone, reading in the library, swimming in the pool, having dinner alone again, and falling asleep watching television until sleep came. On weekends, when there were guests, she played the role of the happy wife, serving drinks, smiling during conversations about politics and agribusiness, being exactly what they expected of her. The loneliness was so profound it became a physical ache. Violet felt a tightness in her chest. Her hands trembled for no reason, a constant anxiety that accompanied her from the moment she opened her eyes until she managed to fall asleep. She even sought medical help, but the psychiatrist recommended by the family simply prescribed tranquilizers and said she needed to better adapt to the rural lifestyle. It was in these darkest moments that she began to write. First, just a few stray sentences in a notebook she hid in the secret drawer of the antique nightstand she had inherited from her great-grandmother. Then entire letters she would never send, addressed to an imaginary sister, telling of the life she led, the feelings she couldn't express, the dreams she still timidly harbored. Writing became her escape valve, the only way to maintain her sanity amidst so much silence. And then, on a Saturday night when Caleb was away in Washington, D.C. for a meeting with senators during a charity event for the Women's League Against Cancer at the most exclusive country club in Dallas, he appeared. Daniel Corrigan, a man with a sharp presence that completely contrasted with the club's atmosphere of discreet ostentation. Tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-tanned skin and the kind of rugged handsomeness that comes from a lifetime of hard work. He wore a simple suit, well-tailored but not designer, and moved with the economy of motion of someone who had been in the military. His dark brown eyes seemed to photograph every person, every corner, every detail, as if he were constantly assessing threats or escape routes. He showed up at the party as the guest of one of the organizers, a cosmetics entrepreneur Violet knew by sight. But unlike the other men present who clustered in groups discussing business and politics, Daniel always stayed on the periphery. He watched. He listened. And when his eyes met hers for the first time across the crowd of long gowns and champagne flutes, Violet felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the blood rushing faster, her heart beating erratically, her body remembering it was still alive. She didn't know if it was attraction or a threat, but there was something about that man that awakened her most primitive instincts. The way he looked at her wasn't with the superficial politeness she was used to, nor with the calculated interest she sometimes noticed in some of her husband's partners. Daniel saw her. Truly saw her. As if he could see through the perfect makeup, the designer dress, the polite smile, and perceive the real woman hiding behind the whole performance. During dinner, as the conversations revolved around the same old topics, the soy harvest, investments in agricultural technology, social projects that served more for tax reduction than for real change, Violet found herself searching for Daniel with her eyes. He was sitting 3 tables ahead, and whenever she looked, it seemed he had just glanced away from her. It was a dangerous game, this exchange of discreet glances in a place where everyone knew each other and everything was gossip. It was during dessert that he approached. Violet was on the club's veranda, breathing in the cool Texas night air, trying to escape for a few minutes from the noise and empty conversations, when she heard footsteps behind her. "Sorry to bother you." The voice was deep with an accent she couldn't immediately place. "I'm Daniel Corrigan. You must be Violet Drummond." She turned, and up close he was even more impressive. His face bore the marks of someone who had lived through intense experiences. A small scar at the corner of his left eyebrow, hands calloused from working with heavy tools, but his eyes held a sharp intelligence, an intensity that left her speechless for a few seconds. "Yes, that's me," she managed to reply, tucking a strand of hair the wind had displaced. "We haven't met, have we?" "Not personally," he said, and there was something in the way he pronounced the words that implied he knew more about her than she did about him. "I work in security consulting. Your beauty preceded our introduction." It was a line that could have been a common compliment, but the way he said it, looking directly into her eyes with an almost brutal sincerity, made Violet feel a warmth rise up her neck. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her as if she were a real person, not just Caleb Drummond's wife. "Security consulting," she repeated, trying to keep her voice steady. "For agribusiness companies?" "Among other things," he replied evasively, but the hint of a smile he gave had a touch of mystery that intrigued her. "And you? Besides being a perfect hostess, of course." The irony in his voice was subtle, but it was there, as if he could see that her entire role as the exemplary wife was just a performance. Violet felt a mix of relief and vulnerability. On one hand, it was liberating to be seen by someone who didn't buy the act. On the other, it was terrifying to have her disguises uncovered by a complete stranger. "I paint," she said before she could censor herself. It was the first time in years she had introduced herself with a characteristic of her own, not in relation to Caleb. "What kind of painting?" "Portraits, landscapes, things I see, man, or things I wish I could see." They talked for another 20 minutes, always maintaining a respectful distance, always in low tones, always careful not to arouse the curiosity of the other guests. Daniel had a unique way of asking questions that seemed casual, but led her to talk about things she normally kept to herself. About the loneliness of the countryside, about how much she missed the city, about how she sometimes felt invisible amid so much grandeur. When they finally said goodbye, he simply said, "It was a pleasure to meet the real Violet," and he walked away, leaving her with a whirlwind of feelings she didn't know how to process. That night back at the ranch, she couldn't sleep. She stood on her bedroom balcony, looking at the stars over the Texas plains, thinking about their conversation, replaying every word, every glance. Why would a man like that be at an event for the rural elite of Texas? What did he really do? And why did the mere memory of his voice make her entire body vibrate in a way she thought she had forgotten forever? What Violet didn't know yet, and would only discover weeks later when it would be too late to turn back, was that Daniel Corrigan had been sent specifically to investigate Caleb and the Drummond family. The federal government had evidence that the family's business went far beyond official agriculture and livestock. There were suspicions of money laundering through overpriced cattle auctions, illegal logging on tribal lands, land grabbing from historic settlements, and even darker rumors about people who opposed the Drummonds' interests and simply disappeared without a trace. Violet, in the investigators' initial view, was a key piece in the scheme. As Caleb's wife, she would have privileged access to information, documents, private conversations. The plan was simple. Daniel would get close to her, gain her trust, and through her, obtain the evidence needed to dismantle the entire operation. But Daniel's plan began to unravel in their first conversation, because it became clear that Violet was not an accomplice to anything. She was just another victim, a gilded prisoner in a luxurious cage kept in the dark about all of her husband's business, isolated from the real world, manipulated and controlled with the same precision with which Caleb controlled every other aspect of his empire. In the days following the event, Daniel couldn't get Violet out of his head. It wasn't just physical attraction, although she was truly one of the most beautiful women he had ever seen, with those green eyes that seemed to hold oceans of sadness and black hair that contrasted with her porcelain-like skin. It was the vulnerability disguised as elegance, the strength she tried to hide, the way she fought to maintain her dignity in a situation that was clearly suffocating her. Daniel began to appear at other social events where he knew she would be. Always discreet, always professional, always with a plausible excuse for being there. But the casual encounters became less casual, the conversations longer, the glances more intense. He started bringing her poetry books, American authors he knew she would appreciate, Emily Dickinson, Mary Oliver, Elizabeth Bishop. He would leave the books in her car with small handwritten notes. For someone with eyes to see beyond appearances, or art saves those who allow themselves to be saved. Violet treasured each note like a secret, hiding the books in her studio among the canvases and reading the poems like someone drinking water after days in the desert. The words seemed to speak directly to her soul, and she began to incorporate verses into her own paintings, creating landscapes that were also feelings, portraits that were also silent confessions. Daniel knew he was crossing every professional line. He knew he was jeopardizing the investigation, that he was getting emotionally involved with someone who was supposed to be just a source of information. But he couldn't stop. Every conversation revealed a new layer of Violet's personality. Every sincere smile from her disarmed him a little more. Every discreet tear he saw in her eyes when she thought no one was looking made him want to protect her from everything and everyone. And Caleb, who for almost 10 years had systematically ignored his wife, for the first time began to notice changes. Small things at first, Violet humming while she painted, a different sparkle in her eyes, a less submissive posture during dinners. He wasn't stupid. He had survived in a world of sharks by always being the bigger predator, and his instincts began to sound alarms. The once indifferent husband started showing up at the ranch unannounced, cancelling important trips, inventing excuses to stay home longer. He began to invade Violet's studio without knocking, touching her paintings, asking questions about the new works, questioning where she had gotten the books he didn't remember buying for her. One July night, when the Texas heat made the house even quieter, Caleb appeared in their bedroom for the first time in months. Violet was reading one of Daniel's books and quickly hid it under her pillow, but she wasn't fast enough. Caleb saw the movement and his gaze hardened. "What's that book?" "Just poetry," Violet replied, trying to keep her voice calm. "Since when are you interested in poetry?" "I've always been interested. You just never asked." It was the first time in years she had responded with a tone that wasn't one of total submission. Caleb noticed the change immediately, and something dangerous glinted in his eyes. That night, he tried to make love to her for the first time in over a year. But it wasn't love. It was a territorial reconquest. It was the property marking of an animal that feels its territory is threatened. Violet submitted because she knew resisting would be worse, but every forced caress, every loveless kiss, every mechanical movement only reinforced how much Daniel had awakened in her. The memory of what it was to feel real desire, true connection, real intimacy. Afterward, as Caleb slept beside her for the first time in months, Violet lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling more alone than ever. And it was on that night that she made a decision that would change everything. She would start investigating the secrets of her own house. If she was going to live in this gilded cage, she would at least try to understand why she was being kept there and who the man she had married really was. In the days following that night, when Caleb reassumed his presence in the marital bedroom, Violet began her own silent investigation of the St. Helens Ranch. It was an immense property, with buildings dating back to the 19th century, renovated and expanded over generations of the Drummond family. There were entire wings she had never fully explored, cellars that Anna Francis always said were full of old junk, and an upper floor in the West Wing that always remained locked. One afternoon when Caleb was in D.C. and Anna had gone to town for supplies, Violet decided to explore the forgotten corners of the house. She started in the library, where there were entire shelves dedicated to the family's ancestors. She found old photo albums, genealogical documents, and diaries that seemed to have been written by women of other generations. But it was in a secret drawer of the old desk, the one Caleb said had belonged to the founding patriarch of the Drummond dynasty, that she found a small bronze key, wrapped in a linen cloth, yellowed with age. The key didn't open any of the obvious locks in the house. Violet tried it on the antique furniture, the chests, the doors of the guest rooms. It was only when she reached the door of the west wing, the one that was always locked, that the key fit perfectly. Her heart pounded as she heard the click of the lock giving way, and she glanced over her shoulder to make sure she was alone before pushing the heavy door open. What she found on the other side made her legs weak. It was a luxurious office, but completely different from Caleb's official office on the ground floor. The walls were covered with detailed maps of various regions of the United States, with markings in different colors, handwritten coordinates and aerial photographs of rural properties she didn't recognize. There were metal filing cabinets full of documents, folders organized by date and region, and a modern computer connected to what looked like surveillance equipment. But what disturbed her most were the photographs, dozens of them, spread across a glass table showing people she didn't know. Men and women of various ages, some children, all with a look of fear in their eyes. The photos seemed to have been taken without the subject's knowledge, through telephoto lenses, in locations ranging from rural areas to urban outskirts. On the back of some were notes like "Subject resolved" or "Relocation completed." With trembling hands, Violet opened the first file she could reach. It concerned a historic settlement in northern Texas, with documents showing land disputes, lawsuits, and reports detailing persuasion methods to convince residents to abandon their properties. The last document in the folder was a death certificate for a community leader, killed in a car accident just days after refusing a purchase offer. Violet's stomach churned. These documents showed a clear pattern. The Drummond family didn't just expand their business through legal means, but also used intimidation, threats, and possibly violence to take land from vulnerable communities. And she, naively, had spent 10 years living off the money that came from this source. It was while she was photographing some documents with her phone that she heard the sound of a car engine coming up the dirt road. Panic seized her. Caleb wasn't supposed to be back until the next day, but she recognized the sound of his BMW. Quickly, she closed the files, turned off the lights, locked the door, and ran down to her own room, where she pretended to be resting when he entered the house. That night, during dinner, Caleb was different, more attentive, more observant. He asked questions about how she had spent her day, if Anna had gone out, if she had received any visitors. Violet answered with all the naturalness she could muster, but she felt the weight of his gaze evaluating her every expression, every gesture. "Are you all right?" he asked at the end of the meal. "You seem nervous." "Just tired," she lied, taking a sip of the red wine he had chosen. "The heat today was unbearable." Caleb said nothing more, but Violet noticed that when they went to bed, he checked to make sure all the doors in the house were locked, something he had never done before. The next morning she found a way to contact Daniel. She knew he frequented a diner in town, a simple place where truckers stopped to eat, located on the route between the ranch and Dallas. She made up an excuse to Anna about needing to buy art supplies in town and drove there. Daniel was sitting at a back table, drinking coffee and reading a newspaper, as if he had been waiting for her. When Violet walked in, he looked up and gave a discreet nod. She ordered a coffee and sat at the table next to his. "We need to talk," she murmured without looking directly at him. "I know a place," he replied softly. "Leaving town, there's an old abandoned chapel on the road to Fredericksburg. Meet me there in an hour." Violet paid for her coffee and left without looking back. An hour later, she was standing in front of a small stone chapel, likely built in the 19th century, surrounded by overgrown weeds and with its windows partially shattered by time. Daniel was already there, leaning against his red pickup truck, smoking a cigarette. "You found something," he said as soon as she got out of the car. It wasn't a question. "How do you know?" By the way you're walking, like someone who's seen something they shouldn't have." They entered the abandoned chapel, where rotting wooden pews shared space with dry leaves and small animals that scurried away as their footsteps echoed in the space. Sunlight streamed through holes in the roof, creating golden beams that danced as the clouds moved across the sky. Violet told him everything she had discovered in the secret office. The photos, the documents, the reports on the historic settlements, the suspicious death certificates. Daniel listened in silence, his face hardening with each revelation. "You knew," she said at the end. "You already knew all of this." Daniel was silent for a few seconds, as if deciding how much to reveal. Finally, he sighed and looked directly into her eyes. "Yes, I knew, or at least I suspected." "Who are you really, Daniel?" "My name is Daniel Corrigan, that's true. I'm ex-military, as I said, but I work for a special department of the FBI that investigates environmental crimes and human rights violations in rural areas. I've been here for 3 months, trying to gather evidence against your family." Violet felt as if the floor had vanished from beneath her feet. "My family? You're investigating me?" "At first, yes. We thought you were part of the scheme, that you knew about the illegal operations. But it was clear from our first conversation that you don't know anything. Caleb keeps you completely isolated from the business." The anger Violet felt was so intense she wanted to hit him. So it was all a lie. The books, the notes, the conversations, you were just doing your job. Daniel moved closer to her, but Violet stepped back. "It was work at first, yes, but it stopped being work the first time you genuinely smiled at me. It stopped being work when I realized you're a prisoner in that house, not an accomplice. And it definitely stopped being work when I started losing sleep thinking about you." The sincerity in his voice disarmed her. Violet wanted to stay angry, wanted to feel betrayed and used, but the way he looked at her, the vulnerability she could see behind his military posture, left her confused and frightened. "And now?" she asked. "What happens now that you—" "No, I'm not an accomplice. Now you have to decide if you want to help us stop your husband, or if you prefer to continue living in ignorance while he destroys innocent lives." Violet was silent for several minutes, processing everything she had discovered in the last 24 hours. The man she was married to was not just cold and controlling, he was a criminal. The land she thought had been legitimately purchased had been stolen from entire families. The money that paid for her luxurious life was stained with blood. "What do you need from me?" she finally asked. "Access to his computers, his files, his phone conversations, evidence that can be used in court to prove the crimes. You're the only person who can get in and out of the house without arousing suspicion." "And after, when Caleb finds out it was me who turned him in, what happens to me?" Daniel approached again, and this time she didn't retreat. He gently touched her face, his thumb wiping away a tear she hadn't even realized she'd shed. "After, you'll be free. Free to rebuild your life however you want. Free to be who you really are, not who Caleb wants you to be. And if it goes wrong, if he finds out before we can gather the evidence, then I'll do what I did in the war. I protect those who need protecting, no matter the cost." There was something in the way he said it that made Violet believe he was serious. Daniel had the demeanor of a man who had faced life-or-death situations, who was not afraid to fight when necessary, but there was also a tenderness in his eyes when he looked at her that made her feel safe for the first time in years. "My sister disappeared 5 years ago," Daniel said suddenly, catching her by surprise. "Marina, she was a journalist, investigating land grabbing in southern Louisiana. The last story she published was about a shell company linked to the Drummond Group that was forging rural property documents. 2 days after it was published, she vanished. Never seen again." Violet felt her heart tighten. "You think Caleb—" "I know it was Caleb, or someone on his orders. And when I can prove it, he will pay for everything he's done, to her, to you, to all the families he's destroyed." The pain in Daniel's voice was palpable. Violet understood that this investigation was not just professional for him, it was personal. It was about justice, about revenge, about a brother's love turned into fuel for a mission. "I'll help," she said, "but I need time. Caleb is suspicious. He's watching me more than before. I have to be very careful. How much time do you need?" A few weeks, maybe a month. He's going to New York next week. He'll be gone for 5 days. I can try to access the computers and files while he's away. Daniel agreed, and they arranged a secure method of communication. Notes hidden in a specific tree on the road to town, a place Violet could access during her morning walks without raising suspicion. Before they parted, Daniel held her hand. "Violet, you need to understand something. From now on, you'll be in real danger. If Caleb suspects you know anything, he won't hesitate to do to you what he did to the other people who became threats." Other people? His first wife, Mariana, died in a car accident 12 years ago, just a few months after she started asking questions about the family business. The maid, who worked in the house before Anna conception, disappeared one night and was never found. There's a pattern, Violet. Caleb eliminates anyone who knows too much. The terror she felt was absolute. For all these years, she had only felt ignored and isolated. She had never imagined she could be physically threatened. "Why hasn't he done anything to me yet?" "Because you were never a threat. You were perfectly domesticated, perfectly ignorant. But that's changing. You are changing. And men like Caleb can sense when they're losing control." Violet drove back home in a state of shock. Everything she thought. She knew about her life had been destroyed in a few hours. She wasn't just an unhappy wife in a loveless marriage. She was a prisoner, married to a murderer, living in a house built on crime, sustained by innocent blood. That night, when Caleb returned from DC, she had to use all her willpower to act normally. She prepared dinner as she always did when he was home, made small talk about trivial matters, feigned interest in his plans to expand the business to the Midwest. But every word he said about new acquisition opportunities sounded like veiled threats to more families that would be destroyed. It was during dessert that Caleb dropped the bomb that would change everything. "I have good news for you," he said, cutting a slice of crème brûlée. "We're throwing a party." "A party?" "To celebrate our 10th wedding anniversary. It's going to be a big event here at the ranch. All the partners, important politicians, industry leaders. I want to show everyone how solid and prosperous our family is." Violet forced a smile. "What a wonderful idea." "And there's more," Caleb continued, a dangerous glint in his eyes. "I've hired a security company that specializes in high-profile events. They'll monitor the entire property, install temporary cameras, run background checks on all the guests. I don't want to take any risks with the safety of our guests or my family." The message was crystal clear. Caleb knew, or at least suspected, that something was going on. The party was a trap, and the security system would be a way to control her every move and identify any suspicious person who might get close. Violet managed to maintain her composure until Caleb went to bed, but as soon as she was alone, she began to cry silently. The window of freedom that had opened with Daniel was closing fast, and she didn't know if she could gather the necessary evidence before it was too late. The next morning, she left a note in the designated tree for Daniel, telling him about the party and the beefed-up security. His reply came the same day. "We need to speed things up. Time is running out." But what neither of them knew was that Anna Francis had seen Violet hiding the note in the tree, and that the housekeeper, who for 20 years had known all the secrets of the Drummond family, had already made her choice about where her loyalty lay. Anna Francis had worked for the Drummond family longer than anyone else. She had arrived at the St. Helens Ranch as a young girl, at 14, the daughter of a laundress who had served the family for generations. She had seen Caleb grow up, seen him transform from a spoiled boy into a dangerous man, seen 3 women pass through that house as wives, and only one managed to leave alive. For 20 years, she had kept the secrets she knew, cared for the house as if it were her own, and protected her own life through silence and absolute loyalty. But Violet was different from the others. Violet had real kindness, treated Anna like a person, not furniture. And when Anna saw her mistress hiding notes in a tree, she knew the time had come to make a decision that could cost her her life. That night, after Caleb was asleep, Anna knocked discreetly on Violet's bedroom door. "May I come in, ma'am?" Violet was sitting in the armchair by the window, still dressed, looking out at the dark fields. "Of course, Anna, what is it?" The housekeeper entered and closed the door behind her. She stood in silence for a few moments as if gathering the courage to speak. "I saw you at the tree this morning." Violet's blood ran cold. Anna knew. And if Anna knew, Caleb would soon know too. "Anna, I can explain." "You don't need to explain anything, my child," Anna interrupted, approaching her. "I know who the man helping you is." Violet looked at her, confused. "You know?" "Daniel Corrigan, ex-army sergeant, lost his sister 5 years ago, works for the government investigating rural crimes." Anna sat on the edge of the bed. "He's not the first investigator to try to bring this family down, but he's the first one who actually cares about you." "How do you know all this?" Anna sighed deeply. "Because I've been informing the government for years. I'm the one who passes information about the illegal activities here to the authorities. Daniel doesn't know that, and you two aren't the only ones trying to stop Caleb." The revelation left Violet completely lost. "You work for the police?" "I work for justice," Anna corrected. "My own daughter was one of the people Caleb had killed. She was a teacher in a rural school, refused to leave the children of the settlement without an education when Caleb wanted to evict the community. She turned up dead in the river a week later." Tears streamed down Anna's face, but her voice remained steady. "Since then I've documented everything I can, every phone call I overhear, every document I see, every suspicious visitor. I have detailed files of 15 years of crimes." Violet stood up and approached the housekeeper, touching her hand. "Why did you never tell me?" "Because the less you knew, the safer you were. But now it's different. Now you're in real danger and you need to know everything." Anna opened the handbag she was carrying and took out a small digital recorder. "This morning Caleb got a call from the family lawyer. They know there's a federal investigator in the area. They know about Daniel." Violet felt the world spin. "Are they going to do something to him?" "They're going to try. That's why we have to act fast." Anna held Violet's hands. "You need to warn Daniel that he's in danger, and you need to decide if you want to get out of here while you still can. I can't abandon Daniel, and I can't let Caleb keep hurting people. Then we'll work together. I know where Caleb keeps the most incriminating files. You can access the computers. Together, we can gather enough evidence to arrest not just Caleb, but the entire network of criminals who work with him." That night, the two women planned everything in meticulous detail. Anna revealed that there was a reinforced vault in the basement, accessible only through a secret passage in the pantry. That was where Caleb kept the most dangerous documents: murder contracts, bribery records, lists of corrupt officials. Caleb was scheduled to travel to New York in 3 days and would be gone for 5. It would be the perfect opportunity to access the vault and copy all the files. Anna knew the combination to the electronic safe, and Violet could photograph or scan the documents while Anna kept watch. The next day, Violet left an urgent note for Daniel in the tree, asking to meet at the abandoned chapel. When she got there, she found Daniel waiting with a tense expression. "They know about you," he said without preamble. "I know Anna told me everything." Daniel frowned. "Anna? The housekeeper? She's been working as an informant for years. Her daughter was murdered by Caleb." Daniel took a few moments to process this information. "This changes everything. If Anna is on our side, we have far greater access than I imagined." Violet told him about the reinforced vault in the basement and their plans for the coming days. Daniel listened, asking pointed questions, assessing risks and opportunities. "It's too dangerous," he said finally. "If Caleb finds out you've accessed that room, there will be nowhere in the world you can hide. And if we do nothing, he'll keep killing innocent people, including you." Daniel moved closer to her, holding her face in his hands. "Violet, I can't let you take this risk." "It's not your decision," she replied, but her voice faltered slightly. His proximity, his masculine scent mixed with the subtle fragrance of cologne, the warmth of his large hands against her skin, all of it made her dizzy. "I care about you too much to let anything happen to you." "Since when?" "Since the first time you smiled at me at the club, since I noticed your eyes get greener when you're sad, since I started having dreams about you and waking up wanting to protect you from everything and everyone." His confession was like a dam breaking. All the sexual tension that had built up over the past weeks, all the charged glances, all the times they had come close without touching, it all exploded at once. Violet didn't know who moved first, but suddenly they were kissing with a desperate urgency. Daniel's hands tangled in her hair, and she felt his entire body pressed against hers, solid, warm, alive in a way she had forgotten was possible. The kiss tasted of freedom. It was different from any contact she had ever had with Caleb, because it came from real desire, from true connection, from two adults choosing each other, instead of a man taking what he considered his property. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. "This can't happen," Daniel murmured, but his hands were still on her face. "Why not?" "Because I'm a federal agent on an undercover operation, and you're married to the man I'm investigating. Because if anyone finds out, it could compromise the entire investigation. Because you deserve better than getting involved with someone who might not survive what's coming." "And what if I don't care about any of that?" Daniel kissed her again, more slowly this time, as if he wanted to memorize every second. "When this is all over," he said against her lips, "when Caleb is in prison and you're free, I'm going to give you the life you deserve. I'll take you to see the ocean. I'll introduce you to my mother back in New Mexico. I'll build a house where you can paint on the porch and watch the horizon." It was the first time in 10 years anyone had spoken of a future for her that didn't involve submission, silence, and solitude. Violet cried, but this time they were tears of hope. They spent another 2 hours in the abandoned chapel, planning every detail of the operation that would take place when Caleb traveled. Daniel explained how to identify which documents were most important, how to photograph them so they would be admissible as evidence in court, how to communicate with him in an emergency. But between the technical instructions, there were moments when he would stop talking just to look at her, as if trying to commit her face to memory. And there were moments when she would touch his hand as he spoke, small contacts that sent waves of heat through her body. "There's something I need to tell you," Daniel said when it was almost time to go back. "About my sister, Marina." "What is it?" "Before she disappeared, she called me. She said she had discovered something much bigger than she had imagined. It wasn't just about land grabbing. It was about human trafficking." Violet felt her blood run cold. Human trafficking? People from the rural communities that Caleb forces off their land. Some are killed, but others disappear. Marina found out they're sold to farms in remote regions where they work as slaves. Young women are sent to other countries. My God. That's why it's so important we get this evidence. We're not just talking about environmental crimes. We're talking about an international human trafficking ring with branches in several South American countries. The magnitude of what Caleb was involved in made Violet nauseous. For all these years, she had lived comfortably, ignoring the source of the money that supported her lifestyle. But now she knew that every expensive dress, every fine dinner, every piece of art in the house had been paid for with human suffering. "I have to stop this," she said with determination, "whatever it takes." Daniel escorted her close to the ranch, but they separated before anyone could see them together. Violet returned home with her body still vibrating from his proximity, but with her mind focused on the mission. Caleb was in his office when she arrived, speaking on the phone in a low, tense voice. She managed to overhear a few words. "Eliminate the problem. Can't take any risks. Has to look like an accident." When he saw Violet at the door, he immediately changed his tone and started talking about supposed business matters. But she knew she had overheard a conversation about how to get rid of Daniel. That night, during dinner, Caleb announced that his trip to New York was confirmed. "I'll be gone for 5 days," he said, cutting his steak. "Important meetings with international investors. Will you be all right here alone?" "I'll be fine," Violet replied, keeping her voice calm. "Anna will take care of everything." "Anna is an exemplary employee," Caleb commented, and there was something in his tone that sounded like a threat. "Always been very discreet, very loyal. I hope she stays that way." Violet forced a smile. "Of course. Anna is part of the family." But when Caleb got up to get wine from the cellar, she saw a paper that had fallen from his briefcase. It was a report from a private security firm, with Daniel's photo and detailed information about his movements in recent days. The report ended with a recommendation: eliminate threat during client's absence. Violet's heart leaped into her throat. Caleb knew exactly who Daniel was and was planning to have him killed while he was out of town to create a perfect alibi. When Caleb returned with the wine, Violet had already slipped the paper into her purse. She finished dinner, feigning normalcy, but inside, she was in a total panic. She had to warn Daniel that he was walking straight into a trap, but how could she do it without arousing suspicion? Caleb was clearly monitoring her every move, and any attempt to leave the ranch would be questioned. It was Anna who provided the solution the next morning. "Mr. Caleb asked me to go to town to pick up some special orders," she said as they prepared breakfast. "Things for his anniversary party. If you'd like to come with me, I can drop you off at the art supply store." It was the perfect opening. Violet agreed, and 2 hours later, she was driving down the dirt road toward town, with Anna in the passenger seat and her heart pounding erratically. But what they didn't know was that Caleb had planted a tracker in the car, and that 2 men on a black motorcycle had started following them as soon as they left the ranch property. The trap was closing and time was running out much faster than either of them imagined. Violet realized they were being followed when Anna discreetly pointed to the rearview mirror for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. The black motorcycle always kept the same distance, and when she slowed down to test them, the bike slowed down too. When she sped up, they sped up with her. "What do we do?" she murmured to Anna, trying to stay calm. "Just keep driving normally into town. We can't let on that we know they're there." But when they reached the center of Fredericksburg, Violet saw Daniel standing in front of the bank, exactly where they had arranged to meet casually so she could warn him about the threat. The men on the motorcycle had also seen Daniel, and she realized they were speaking into their radios, probably communicating his location to others. Anna thought fast. "Pull over up ahead at the pharmacy. I'll get out and warn him. You continue to the art supply store as planned." "Anna, that's too dangerous." "My child, I've survived 20 years in that house knowing all the secrets I know, trust me." Anna got out at the pharmacy with an impressive casualness, and Violet continued driving to the art supply store. In the rearview mirror, she saw that one of the men on the motorcycle followed her, while the other stayed behind, watching the area where Daniel was. In the store, Violet pretended to examine paints and brushes, while her heart hammered in her chest. 20 minutes later, Anna arrived with a bag of medicine and a calm expression that wouldn't fool anyone who knew her well. "I did it," she whispered, as they looked at tubes of paint. "I told him about the report you saw. He's leaving town today. And the men who are following us. One of them is still outside the store. The other one disappeared, probably went after Daniel." They stayed in town for another hour, buying the items Caleb had requested for the party, always aware that they were being watched. When they finally returned to the ranch, Violet was exhausted from the tension, but relieved to know that Daniel was safe. The next morning, Caleb left for New York. Violet walked him to the car, gave him the usual farewell kiss, and waved as he drove down the dirt road. But as soon as the BMW disappeared among the trees, her mask of the obedient wife fell away completely. "We have 5 days," she said to Anna, as soon as they were back inside. 3 days, Anna corrected. "Caleb might decide to come back early if he suspects anything. We need to do everything today and tomorrow." They waited until mid-afternoon, when the ranch hands were tending to the cattle in the furthest pastures. Anna led Violet to the pantry, moved a heavy shelf of canned goods, and revealed a metal door discreetly disguised in the wall. "The combination is the birth date of Caleb's first wife," Anna said, typing the numbers into the electronic keypad. "Mariana, the woman he had killed when she discovered his first crimes." The door opened with a muffled sound, revealing a staircase leading down to the basement. The air that rose was cold and smelled of dampness and old paper. Anna turned on her phone's flashlight and started down. "Watch your step," she murmured. "Some of the stairs are loose." What Violet found in the basement made her legs weak. It was a complete archive of the Drummond family's criminal life, methodically organized over decades. Folders with documents about murders, contracts with hitmen, records of bribes to politicians and judges, detailed maps of human trafficking routes, and photographs documenting unimaginable atrocities. On one entire wall was a kind of macabre museum, personal belongings of people who had been killed, including driver's licenses, watches, wedding rings. In a glass case, Violet saw a brown leather purse she recognized from the photos Daniel had shown her. It belonged to his sister, Marina. "My God," she whispered, touching the glass. "He kept trophies." "Caleb is a psychopath," Anna said simply. "He enjoys killing. It's not just a necessity. That's why he keeps these things." They spent the next 4 hours photographing documents, copying digital files, and gathering evidence that would prove not only Caleb's crimes, but those of an entire network that included politicians, businessmen, and corrupt officials from several states. Violet discovered that her own marriage had been part of a larger plan. Caleb needed the image of a stable, married man to secure international loans that financed his trafficking operations. The financial ruin of the Caldwell family had been orchestrated by Caleb himself, who had bribed her father's creditors to force him to accept the marriage. "He planned everything," she said, reading a detailed report on Operation Violet. "From the very first day I was just a pawn in his game." "But now you have the power to destroy his game," Anna replied. It was as they were finishing photographing the last documents that they heard the sound of a car engine coming up the road. It was too early for Caleb to be back from New York, but Violet recognized the sound of that specific engine. "It's his car," she whispered in panic. Anna checked the security cameras on her phone. She had installed an app that showed all the property entrances. "It's not Caleb," she said, relieved. "It's the family lawyer, Dr. Ramirez, but he can't find us here." They hurried upstairs, closed the secret door, pushed the shelf back into place, and by the time the lawyer rang the doorbell, Violet was already in the living room pretending to read a book. Dr. Ramirez was a short man in his 60s, with graying hair slicked back and expensive suits that couldn't hide his essentially sinister nature. He greeted Violet with his usual false politeness, but there was something different in his eyes. "Mrs. Drummond, I've come to pick up some important documents from Caleb's office. He authorized me over the phone." "Of course, Doctor. Make yourself at home." But instead of going straight to the official office on the ground floor, Dr. Ramirez began to walk through the house as if he were looking for something specific. Violet and Anna followed him at a tense distance. "Are you looking for something in particular, sir?" Anna asked when she saw him examining the pantry. "Just checking the security of the house," he replied evasively. "Caleb is concerned about some irregularities he noticed before he left." The word irregularities sounded like an alarm siren. Dr. Ramirez knew something, or at least suspected it. He spent another hour in the house, poking around in places he had no reason to be, asking subtle but pointed questions about Violet's routine, recent visitors, anything out of the ordinary. When he finally left, he took only one folder from the official office, but Violet was sure the visit had been a reconnaissance mission. "He suspects," she said to Anna as soon as they were alone. "Worse, he knows." Anna was pale. The way he looked at the pantry. "The questions he asked about our routine. Someone told them we've been investigating." "Who could have told them?" "I don't know, but we need to get out of here. Tonight." Anna went up to her room and came back with a small suitcase and a revolver. "You have a gun?" Violet asked, surprised. "I've slept with this gun under my pillow for 20 years. Never had to use it, but today might be the day." They stayed up all night, taking turns to watch the road, organizing the evidence they had collected onto flash drives and memory cards and planning escape routes. Anna had contacts in historic settlements who could hide them temporarily, and Violet knew Daniel had mentioned a safe house for witnesses in federal crimes. But at 5 in the morning, as the sky was beginning to lighten, Violet saw something that made her blood run cold. 3 cars driving up the road toward the house. It wasn't Caleb. It was a convoy of armed men. "Anna!" she cried, running to the housekeeper's room. "They're here!" Anna jumped out of bed, already dressed, grabbing the gun and the evidence. "There's a trail behind the house that leads into the woods," she said quickly. "If we can get there without being seen, we can escape." But when they opened the back door, they saw that the house was already surrounded. Men in black carrying heavy weapons occupied all the strategic positions. "Mrs. Drummond," an amplified voice echoed through a loudspeaker. "We know you're in there. Come out to the front porch with your hands visible, and no one gets hurt." Violet looked at Anna, who shook her head. "Don't go," she whispered. "If you go out there, you're dead." "If I don't go out, we're both dead." It was then that they heard the sound of approaching helicopters, but they weren't Caleb's men's helicopters. They were FBI helicopters, sirens blaring, announcing over loudspeakers that the area was surrounded and that everyone should drop their weapons. Daniel had managed to gather enough evidence from the information Violet had given him, and he had arrived with reinforcements at the exact right moment. What followed was a standoff that lasted 2 hours. Gunfire, shouted commands, explosions of tear gas grenades. Violet and Anna stayed locked in the room, holding each other, praying for it to end. When silence finally returned, it was Daniel's voice they heard over the megaphone. "Violet, it's me. It's okay. You can come out." She ran to the porch and saw Daniel climbing the steps, dirty, with a cut on his forehead, but alive. He hugged her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I thought I'd lost you," he murmured in her ear. "How did you know we needed help?" "Anna managed to send a distress signal using a code only we knew, and the evidence you two collected yesterday was enough for us to get search and seizure warrants for all of the Drummond family properties simultaneously. And Caleb, arrested at JFK airport as he was trying to board a flight to Switzerland. Dr. Ramirez was also arrested, and 20 more people involved in the network were detained in coordinated operations across 6 states. Violet felt her legs give way with relief. It was over. Finally, it was over. But Daniel held her face in his hands, his expression serious. "There's something you need to know." "What?" "Caleb won't stay in prison forever. Men like him have lawyers, money, connections. He could get out in a few years, and when he does, he'll want revenge." Fear tightened its grip on Violet's chest. Again. "What does that mean?" "It means you can't be Violet Drummond anymore. You'll have to change your identity, live somewhere else, start a new life." "And you?" she asked, already knowing she wouldn't like the answer. "I have to keep working on the investigation. There are international branches that will take years to dismantle, and I can't put you at risk by being near you." Violet felt her heart breaking all over again. After everything they had been through together, after finally finding each other, they had to separate. "But," Daniel continued, touching her face tenderly, "when this is all really over, when I'm sure there's no more danger, I will find you, no matter where you are, no matter how much time passes. I will find you." Was it a promise or a farewell? Violet didn't know. She only knew that once again her life was being decided by circumstances, not by her own choices. But for the first time in 10 years, she was free. And freedom, even with its uncertainties and fears, was so much better than the gilded cage she had lived in. 6 months later, Violet was living in a small, cozy house in Charleston, South Carolina, on a quiet street in the coastal district, where the sound of the waves reached her porch on windy days. She had chosen South Carolina because she had always dreamed of living near the sea, and because no one in the Drummond family had significant connections in the region. She now went by the name Helena Stone, had new documents provided by the Witness Protection Program, and worked as an art teacher at a public school. It was a simple life, very different from the opulence of the ranch, but for the first time in over a decade, she woke up every day feeling that she was living her own life, not one that had been designed for her. The apartment she rented had only 2 bedrooms, a small living room, and a porch she had turned into a studio. She mostly painted seascapes and portraits of the children from her school, and she was slowly discovering a style of her own that she had never been able to develop while living under Caleb's control. Anna was also doing well. She had been relocated to a town in upstate New York, where she cared for a retired, elderly couple. They spoke on the phone once a week, always using simple codes to ensure no one was intercepting their calls. Anna had become more than a friend. She was the only person in the world who truly knew the whole truth about who Violet had been and how she had gotten here. The trial of Caleb and the others involved in the criminal network was scheduled to take place in 8 months. Violet would have to return to Texas to testify, but the prosecutors assured her that her identity would be protected and that she would only be exposed for the minimum time necessary. Daniel had completely disappeared from her life. She learned from the newspapers that he was leading international operations related to the case, that he had traveled to Paraguay and Bolivia following leads on human trafficking routes, but they had no direct contact. Sometimes late at night, when she was painting on the porch and could hear the sea, Violet wondered if he thought of her, if he missed the moments they had spent together, if he still intended to keep his promise to find her when it was all over. Life in Charleston was a constant rediscovery. Violet had forgotten what it was like to make simple decisions, what food to cook for dinner, what clothes to wear, what book to read, what movie to watch. She had forgotten what it was like to talk to people without having to measure every word, without being afraid of saying the wrong thing that could have dangerous consequences. At the school where she worked, her colleagues knew her as a dedicated and talented teacher, but a reserved one. She avoided talking about her past, always changing the subject when asked about family or previous relationships. But gradually she was making genuine friendships for the first time in years. Lucia, the English teacher who taught in the classroom next door, had become her closest confidant. She was a 40-year-old woman, divorced, a mother of 2 teenagers, with the kind of warm, direct personality typical of the South. She had noticed from the beginning that Helena, as she knew Violet, had the look of someone who's been through hell, but she never pressed for details. "You should get out more," Lucia said one Friday, as they were cleaning up art supplies after class. "Staying home and painting is great, but you're a beautiful, smart, free woman. You could be enjoying it more." "I like my life the way it is," Violet replied, cleaning her brushes. "Do you like it, or are you afraid?" The question caught Violet by surprise. Lucia had an impressive ability to get straight to the point. "A little of both," she admitted. "Look, I know you went through something difficult. I don't know what it was, but I recognize the signs. I went through it too. My ex-husband was complicated, controlling, violent at times." Lucia sat on the desk beside her. "I know what it's like to start over, what it's like to be afraid to trust people, to open yourself up to new possibilities." Violet stopped cleaning her brushes and looked at her friend. "But I also know that there comes a time when you have to decide, are you going to live in fear forever, or are you going to try to be happy again?" It was a conversation Violet needed to have, but she hadn't known she needed it. In recent months, she had grown so accustomed to the peace of living without threats that she had begun to confuse safety with happiness. She was safe, she was free, but was she truly living? That night, alone on her porch painting another seascape, Violet thought about Lucia's words. There was a difference between being free from Caleb and being truly free. She had escaped the physical and emotional prison of her marriage, but she was still living in a prison of fear, avoiding deep connections, avoiding risks, avoiding anything that could make her vulnerable again. It was then that she decided to do something she hadn't done in years. She went for a walk on the beach alone at night. The beach at night had a wild and mysterious beauty. The moon was full, creating a silver path on the waves, and there were few people, a few fishermen, a young couple here and there, groups of friends drinking beer on the sand. Violet took off her shoes and walked barefoot at the water's edge, feeling the cool sand between her toes and the sea foam wetting her feet. She was so absorbed in the feeling of freedom that she almost didn't notice the man walking in the same direction, a few yards behind her. Only when he quickened his pace to walk beside her did she look up and get a shock that nearly made her fall. It was Daniel. He looked different. Longer hair, a bit of a beard, more tanned skin, and he was wearing casual clothes instead of the suits he used to wear when they first met. But his eyes were the same, those dark brown eyes that seemed to see more than they should. "Hi," he said simply, as if it were normal to run into her on a beach in Charleston at 11 o'clock at night. Violet was speechless for a few seconds, her heart racing. "Hi," she finally managed to reply. "Can I walk with you?" She nodded, and they continued walking side by side in silence for a few minutes, just listening to the sound of the waves and feeling the sea breeze on their faces. "How did you find me?" she finally asked. "It wasn't hard. You always said you wanted to see the ocean. Charleston was the obvious choice for someone wanting to start over near the water, and you paint on your porch every night. You just have to pay attention to the houses with lights on late and the smell of paint. How long have you been here? 3 days. I was waiting for the right moment to approach. Why now? Daniel stopped walking and turned to face her. Because the international operations are finally wrapping up, because we arrested the last people in the network last week, and because I couldn't stay away from you any longer. Violet felt something stir in her chest, a mixture of joy and fear she didn't know how to process. Daniel, You don't have to say anything right now, he interrupted. I know I disappeared for months without a word. I know you must be confused, maybe angry. I just wanted you to know that I kept my promise. I found you. And now? Now it's up to you. If you want me to leave and never come back, I will. If you want me to stay, and we try to figure out if what we felt for each other still exists, I'll stay. It was the first time since she had left the ranch that someone had placed an important choice entirely in her hands. It wasn't pressure, it wasn't manipulation, it wasn't control disguised as protection. It was a genuine offer, and the decision was completely hers. Violet looked at the sea, at the moon, at the stars, trying to organize the thoughts and feelings that were swirling confusedly inside her. I have a life here now, she said finally. I have a job, friends, a routine. It's not an extraordinary life, but it's mine. I know, and I'm scared. Scared of becoming dependent on someone again, scared of losing my independence, scared that you'll disappear again when a new mission comes up. I understand completely. But also, she continued, looking into his eyes, I miss you every day. I miss our conversations, the way you looked at me, the way you made me feel special and strong at the same time. Daniel took a step toward her, but didn't touch her. I didn't come here to take you away from the life you've built, he said. I came to see if I could be a part of this life, if you'll let me. And your job? I requested a transfer to the FBI field office in Charleston. If you'll have me here, I'll be investigating local crimes, have regular office hours, weekends off. I'll be a regular cop, not a special agent chasing international criminals. It was a tempting offer, but Violet had learned to be cautious. I need time to think. As much time as you want. I'll be in town, at the hotel near the center. When you decide, you can find me. Or not, if that's the case. Daniel took a piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to her. It was the hotel address and room number. One last thing, he said before walking away. The Helena you've become is even more impressive than the Violet I knew. Whatever you decide, I want you to know how proud I am of the strength and courage you had to rebuild your life. He walked away along the sand, and Violet stood at the water's edge, holding the paper and trying to understand the conflicting emotions that overwhelmed her. She spent the entire weekend thinking. She talked at length with Anna on the phone, confided in Lucia, and painted 3 new canvases trying to express the confusion of emotions she felt through her art. On Monday, when she returned to school, Lucia looked at her and said, Something happened. You look different. He showed up. He? The man I loved before I came here. Lucia sat beside her, her eyes shining with curiosity and concern. And I'm terrified. Why? Because when I'm with him, I feel like I can be vulnerable again. And vulnerability scares me after everything I've been through. Lucia was thoughtful for a few moments. Helena, can I ask you a question? Of course. When you paint, aren't you vulnerable? When you open up to the children here at school, when you laugh with me about our silly jokes, when you cry watching a sappy movie, aren't you vulnerable? Violet had never thought of it that way. Vulnerability isn't weakness, Lucia continued. Vulnerability is courage. It's the courage to live fully, even knowing we might get hurt. That afternoon, after school, Violet went to the hotel in the center of town. She asked the front desk to call Daniel Corrigan's room and said only, It's me, I'm in the lobby. 5 minutes later, he came down. He was more put together, in a button-down shirt and jeans, but he still had that slightly military way of moving, economical and precise. I want to try, she said as soon as she saw him. Are you sure? No, I'm scared, I have doubts, I don't know if it will work out, but I want to try. Daniel smiled, and it was the first truly happy smile she had seen on his face since they met. Then, let's take it slow. No rush, no pressure. Let's get to know each other again in a normal situation without being chased, without danger, without secrets. Do you want to see my house? Violet asked, surprising herself with her own courage. I want to see your life, he replied. And they walked through the city, together, Violet showing him the places she had discovered in recent months, the bakery where she had breakfast, the bookstore she frequented, the school where she worked, the beach where she walked every afternoon. For the first time, they weren't two people fleeing danger or conspiring against a common enemy. They were just a man and a woman, free to choose to be together, discovering if what they felt for each other could turn into something lasting and real. 2 years later, on a sunny December morning, Violet woke up in the new house she and Daniel had bought in a quiet neighborhood overlooking the bay. It was a small house, but with a garden where she could plant flowers and a spacious studio where the morning light poured in through the large windows Daniel had specially installed for her. Their relationship had developed slowly and carefully, like two people who knew the value of trust built brick by brick. Daniel kept his word. He worked at the FBI office in Charleston, investigating local crimes, came home at a normal hour, and spent weekends having barbecues with friends and teaching Violet how to fish at the beach. She continued to work at the school, but now also sold her paintings at a small gallery in the historic district. Her work had evolved tremendously. She still painted seascapes, but now she included human figures, expressive faces, situations that told stories of overcoming and rebirth. The local critics had started to notice her work, and she was preparing for her first solo exhibition. On that particular December morning, they woke up early because they had an important appointment. It was the day of the final sentencing in Caleb Drummond's trial. The process had lasted nearly 2 years, with appeals, legal maneuvers, and intimidation attempts that thankfully never reached Charleston. Daniel had participated as an expert witness, and Violet had given her testimony via video conference, her identity protected. Anna had also testified, and several other victims of the Drummond family had found the courage to speak out. The evidence they had collected from the secret vault was crucial for the conviction. Caleb was found guilty of racketeering, murder, human trafficking, environmental crimes, and an extensive list of other charges. Dr. Ramirez was also convicted, along with 15 other people in the criminal network. Nervous? Daniel asked, as they had coffee on the porch, watching the fishing boats return from their early morning on the water. A little, Violet admitted. It's strange to know that today will definitively be the end of a chapter of my life, and the beginning of another. Daniel had made a special reservation for dinner that night at a romantic restaurant overlooking the sea, and Violet suspected there was something more behind the celebration. In recent months he had been more mysterious than usual, making phone calls he would end when she entered the room, going out alone on some afternoons claiming errands he didn't explain. At first, this had made her insecure, old ghosts from the past whispering that he might be hiding something dangerous or harmful. But Violet had learned to differentiate between destructive secrets and loving ones, and from Daniel's general behavior, she suspected it was the latter. At 2 in the afternoon, they received the call from the prosecutor's office. Caleb had been sentenced to 50 years in prison without the possibility of parole. It was a complete victory. Violet felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief, obviously. Satisfaction in knowing that justice had been served, but also a strange sadness for the lost time, the destroyed lives, for everything that could have been different if she had found the courage to act sooner. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked, hugging her from behind as she looked out at the sea from the porch. "I'm thinking about the people he killed," she said. "Your sister, Anna's daughter, all the families he destroyed. His conviction doesn't bring anyone back." "No," Daniel agreed, "but it stops him from destroying more lives, and it gives a little peace to those who survived." "Do you feel peace?" Daniel was thoughtful for a few moments. "I feel closure. I feel like I've fulfilled my promise to Marina. And I feel that now I can live in the present without always looking to the past." That night, at the restaurant, Daniel was clearly nervous in a way Violet had never seen. He fidgeted with his napkin, rearranged the silverware on the table, and took strange pauses in the middle of their conversations. "Daniel, are you okay? You look like you're going to be sick." He laughed, but he was visibly sweating. "I'm fine. It's just, there's something I wanted to talk to you about." Violet felt her heart speed up. After everything they had been through together, there were still moments when a sudden change in his behavior activated her alarm instincts. "What is it?" Daniel took a deep breath and held her hands across the table. "Violet, these 2 years with you have been the best of my life. You've shown me that it's possible to be truly happy, that it's possible to build something beautiful even after going through so much ugliness." He was speaking faster than usual, as if he had rehearsed a speech and was afraid of forgetting a part. "You've shown me that courage isn't about not being afraid, but about doing the right thing even when you are afraid. You are the strongest, most generous person I know, and I... Daniel stopped talking, took a small velvet box from his pocket, and knelt beside the table. "I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy. Will you marry me?" The surprise was so great that Violet was speechless for a few seconds, unable to process what was happening. People at nearby tables started to look and whisper. The waiter stopped serving other tables to watch, and Daniel remained kneeling, waiting for an answer. When she finally managed to speak, tears were already streaming down her face. "Daniel, if it's too soon, we can wait. If you don't want to get officially married but want to be together forever, that works too. I just needed you to know that. Yes. Yes? Yes, I want to marry you." The entire restaurant applauded as Daniel placed the ring on her finger and kissed her, still kneeling beside the table. It was a simple ring, a small but very beautiful stone, and engraved inside was a phrase she recognized immediately: "You finally blossomed." "It was the first thing I thought about you," Daniel explained when they got home. "The day I met you at the club, you seemed like a flower that was trying to bloom despite being in bad soil, and today you have completely blossomed." The wedding was 6 months later, a small ceremony on the beach, with only their closest friends. Anna came from New York and was Violet's maid of honor. Lucia organized the entire party, insisting that her friend deserved a perfect day. Colleagues from school and the art gallery were there, along with some friends Daniel had made at work. Violet wore a simple white cotton dress with flowers in her hair, and she was more radiant than any bride in a magazine. When she said, "I do," before the justice of the peace, she wasn't just agreeing to marry Daniel. She was definitively accepting her new life, her new identity, her right to be happy. Their honeymoon was in New Mexico, in Daniel's hometown, where she finally met his mother, Mrs. Francis. She was a small woman with gray hair and the calloused hands of a seamstress, who welcomed Violet as if she were a daughter she had waited for her whole life. "My son changed after he met you," Mrs. Francis said one afternoon as they were making tortillas in the kitchen while Daniel slept in a hammock in the backyard. "Before, he always seemed to be carrying a heavy weight. Now, he seems to have found peace." "He saved me," Violet replied, grating fresh cheese. "You saved each other," Mrs. Francis corrected. "That's what happens when two people find each other at the right time." When they returned to Charleston, Violet finally felt truly at home. Not just in the city, not just in the house, but in her own life. For the first time since she was a teenager, she woke up every morning knowing exactly who she was and what she wanted. A few months later, she received a letter that moved her deeply. It was from a young woman named Carla, who lived in a historic settlement in northern Texas. Carla explained that her family had been one of those forced off their land by Caleb Drummond, but after the trial, they had not only managed to reclaim their property, but also received compensation for the damages suffered. "You don't know me," the letter read, "but I want you to know that the courage you had to report that man changed the lives of many families. Today we have our land back, our children are in school, and we are building a dignified life. Thank you for not staying silent." Violet cried reading that letter, but they were tears of joy. All the suffering, all the fear, all the risks she had taken had been worth it. Her courage had saved not only her own life, but the lives of dozens of other people. That night, she showed the letter to Daniel. "You saved a lot more people than you realize," he said, hugging her on the porch as they watched the sunset over the bay. "We saved them," she corrected. I never could have done it alone. No, my love. You made the hardest decisions on your own. I just helped you execute the plan. 2 years after their wedding, Violet opened her first solo exhibition at the most important contemporary art gallery in Charleston. The exhibition was titled Rebirth, and it contained 30 paintings that chronicled her journey over the past few years, from the dark landscapes she had painted at the ranch to the explosions of color and life she created now. The exhibition was an absolute success. Art critics came from New York and Atlanta to see the work, several paintings were sold, and a national magazine did a feature on the artist who turned pain into beauty. But the most special moment of the opening night was when Anna arrived, elegant in a navy blue dress, accompanied by a kind gentleman she introduced as Joaquin, my partner. Anna had found love at 60, and she was radiant with happiness. "Look at what you've become," Anna whispered in Violet's ear when she greeted her. "A famous artist, a fulfilled woman, a happy wife. I'm so proud." "I wouldn't have gotten here without you," Violet replied. "You always had that strength inside you, my child. You just needed to discover it." At the end of the night, when all the guests had left and they were cleaning up the gallery, Daniel held Violet by the shoulders and made her stop in front of one of the paintings. It was the last in the series, painted just 2 weeks earlier. It showed a woman standing on a beach, her back to the viewer, looking at the infinite horizon. The sea was calm. The sky had shades of pink and gold from the dawn, and the woman had her arms open as if embracing the world. "This one is my favorite," Daniel said. "Why?" "Because when I look at it, I see you exactly as you are today. Free, strong, at peace, ready for whatever life brings." Violet looked at her own painting and smiled. It was true. The woman in the painting was in complete harmony with the world around her. She wasn't running, she wasn't hiding, she wasn't afraid. She was simply being. "Do you think we'll live happily ever after?" she asked, resting her head on his shoulder. "I think we'll work every day to be happy," Daniel replied, "and I think we'll succeed most of the time." It was an honest, realistic answer, with no impossible promises. And for Violet, who had learned to value truth above all else, it was exactly the right answer. 5 years later, they still lived in the same house overlooking the bay. Violet had become a regionally recognized artist, with works in private collections and museums. Daniel had been promoted and now coordinated operations against organized crime throughout the state of South Carolina. They had 2 cats, a garden that Violet tended to personally, and a life that any normal person would consider ordinary and peaceful. But for someone who had come from hell, the ordinary was extraordinary. For someone who had been a prisoner, tranquility was a gift. For someone who had been silenced, having a voice was a daily miracle. One autumn afternoon, while painting on the porch and listening to Daniel humming in the shower after a day's work, Violet paused to look around. The house full of light, the canvases leaning against the walls, the books scattered on the table, the plants she had carefully cultivated, the cats sleeping on the sofa. This was it. It was a simple life, built day by day, choice, by 2 people who had decided they deserved to be happy. It wasn't a fairy tale life because fairy tales don't exist. It was better. It was a real life, with real problems and real joys, but lived by free people who truly loved each other. Violet smiled, dipped her brush in yellow paint, and continued to paint. Outside, the sea continued its ebb and flow, eternal and tranquil, as it always had been, as it always would be. And she finally had learned to be like the sea, constant, yet always in motion, strong, yet capable of gentleness, forever free.